The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André, your podcast host. Big thanks to Ukla the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in to another show. Today we delve into the wide and deep and horrifying world of horror comics. I mean, I don't know why I use the word horrifying to describe horror comics. That's just poor talking. But hey, we don't warts and all here. So we got the Graphic Histories Podcast. We talk with Doug Wagner, who's the creator of such modern-day horror comics as Plush, Vinyl, Plastic, and I Was a Fashion School Serial Killer. A lot of books on serial killers. We talk about it. Also a lot of books on horror. And we get into his sort of his delving into horror, his history with that, his history with writing comics and everything in between. And it's a great conversation with a really cool creator making some great work. So get out there, check out that work, and enjoy it because it is well worth your time. Vinyl particularly caught my attention. I believe I was reading a graphic novel, a kind of review section on a horror magazine I used to read. And they had a whole section on comics, and one of them was about this one, Vinyl. And I remember I went to my local comic shop, Strange Adventures in Halifax, and picked it up, and it was great. Really interesting, different take on it. And yeah, they seem to be doing well. He seems to be having a great career doing these sort of interesting takes on serial killers. And also cool ideas for like movies and TV. So cool guys like Doug need more attention. So any studio executives listening, which I'm sure you are, 100% sure you are, tune in, read the book and make a show out of it. Give Doug some more money. He deserves it. On the regular front, things are going well. I was feeling a little bogged down, a little overwhelmed because I had a lot going on with the dinner theater, but thankfully enough it kind of timed up with the hiatus that I was on when I was doing stuff. Lebowski is crying at me. I don't know if you heard that. He's very upset. Lebowski, what are you so upset about? What's wrong? He's often a guest star if you watch any of the clips I post, the reels on YouTube, and on the Facebook. You'll sometimes see the Facebook. There's my age coming through. You'll sometimes see him make an appearance. Not that often, but he generally does on these shows, so he's my co-host sometimes. But as you can tell, I forgot what I was talking about. What was I talking about? Oh my god. Alright, look, I'm not re-recording this. You're going to have to deal with me forgetting things, talking about things, getting with things. And, the home front, yeah. Oh yeah, so now I'm catching up. We're getting back. We got the episodes. Davin's working day and night to get me some new guests, and I also am out there waving the flag as much as possible. And we got a new crop coming in. That looks like we're going to be back on track, hopefully. So going into the summer months, we'll have new episodes every week. And, every once in a while, if it drops off, I don't get one in the can on a Monday or so. No big deal. You guys understand. I'm sure you do. It's a lot of work to keep a weekly podcast going. There are a lot of people out there doing bi-weekly ones or big, really highly polished week ones. 2 times a week, Mark Maron, I know you're listening. But they have a staff. They have at least another guy out there that puts it all together for them. Puts it out there, does all the promoting and the cutting of the reels and all that stuff. And I'm doing all that. It's all me. Top of a regular job. So, I'm working it. I'm out there. And we're here. And I really appreciate the time we've taken to support the show as much as you have so far. And even more to come. So please continue to enjoy, continue to support, and share, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. If you're following this on YouTube, as I'm starting to pick up people there, maybe I'll throw in video episodes. I'm not sure yet. Something I've been thinking about. I don't know, man. It's a lot of time, and I really respect and like the audio podcast because you can do it at the gym, on a drive, mowing the lawn, making meals, doing the dishes, cleaning the house. These are all things I listen to podcasts at. And because I'm at the gym 5 days a week, I get a lot of them in. And it's a great way to keep your mind going while you're doing stuff. Same with driving. Long drives are way easier with a podcast. And it's kind of the format I appreciate. I guess you can do both. There's no reason you can't, but it's a lot of time. So think about it. I'm working on it. Maybe. But for the meantime, audio only. You have to look at something else while you're listening. But since you are listening, let's get into this episode. So here's my chat with creator of Plush and Plastic and Vinyl, and I Was a Teenage Serial Killer and a few other books, Doug Wagner. How's your day going?
Oh, pretty good, man.
Yeah, awesome.
No complaints.
Yeah, you're in Utah, is that right?
That is correct.
Wow, I don't have much of a sense of Utah. I do have a friend who's from there. He married my friend's wife. They met. I think they were both teaching in Japan or China or something when they met. But he's from Ontario and she's from Utah. So she's the only person I think I know from that area. So
I mean, first off, it's not a very big state. And, we moved out here it's been like 15 years now. We moved out here from Atlanta. And,
okay.
I mean, we love it, but yeah, it's definitely a small state and not a lot of people know about it or are familiar with it. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's known, I guess, in the obviously for the Mormon population and stuff is what I mostly know of it or for it. But that's about it. I mean, it's also like seems like a beautiful place from what I've seen and what I've heard. But
oh yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, good.
And it's love that part of it, especially Southern Utah. Is just like it's like another planet and going and visiting that. Like if you ever get a chance, dude, like you definitely want to go down there. What was it? Galaxy Quest. You've seen Galaxy Quest?
Yeah.
The part with the little monsters.
Oh, really?
That's actually shot in one of the state parks here. That's what it really.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
it's funny because my friend, his name's Brent and his wife's Kate. She they I think they were telling me one time they're trying to watch as many movies as they could that were filmed in Utah. And I don't remember them mentioning Galaxy Quest, but I mentioned there's a few weird like old black and white horror movies and stuff that were like sci-fi horror movie, alien stuff that was filmed out there. So they were kind of going through what they could find, or at least what they could see was filmed there. So
yeah, that probably didn't take long.
Yeah, I don't think it was a super long film festival.
Yeah.
Well, where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Florida. So
Oh,
I grew
wow.
up, yeah, for most of my childhood in Florida, and then moved to Alabama. But I've lived all through the South as well. So Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia.
Was dad in
Yeah,
the military or something? Why so much
yeah.
moving?
My dad was in the army.
Uh,
But most of that was just predicated by my mom. We moved a lot.
mhm.
We were pretty transient.
No, that's nothing wrong with that. It's a good way to see the country, see the world.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
What did your mom do?
My mom did nothing. My mom
No.
just had boyfriends.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Lots and lots of boyfriends.
That makes sense. So were your
Yep.
folks together when you were like, do you have a memory of that, or
What's that?
how long were your folks together for? Before I'm assuming they
My
split up and
mom.
boyfriends were in
Yeah,
there.
my parents divorced when I was 2, so I barely remember some stuff.
Okay.
But for the most part, like, spend every weekend with my dad and in the weeks with my mom. So,
Yeah. That was a lot of traveling, like just to get to the weekends with your dad, I'd imagine, if you're all over
oh
the
yeah,
different
yeah.
parts of
I
the
mean,
states.
I give it to my dad. He was always up to picking me up. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, when you talk to folks like yourself that kind of seem to have a childhood on the go, often one of the steadfast things that they kind of find along that keeps them kind of grounded is comics. Was that something for you, or
oh, I mean, yeah, comics was a huge part of,
yeah?
I've said this multiple times. I'm not sure I make it through school without comics. Comics actually taught me to read. And
I've heard that
so,
before. Yeah.
yeah, I had no interest in school, didn't like it, hated it, didn't want to be there 99% of the time.
Hmm.
And so, like bumping into comics when I was a really young kid. And it was this stuff, like Casper and the Flintstones and Hot Stuff, that kind of, those
Hmm.
kind of comics. I just was enthralled with them. And I wouldn't have read anything if it wouldn't have been for comics.
Wow.
And it just became a steady diet for me until now. Like
Yeah.
I said, to this day, I still read comics.
That's awesome. Was your folks supportive of you getting like deep into comics, or is it just like a childhood thing for them?
Dad, yes. Mom, no.
Really?
Yeah, my mom hated my mom was very, and this, just, she's an Indian,
Hmm.
American native that was
Hmm.
born and adopted by a white family. And
Oh.
the mother was very like, wanted to be upper class, very, normal. This is the only term I can. So, my mom was very much against like anything that wasn't norm.
Really?
Yes.
That's quite a surprising upbringing for your mother. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah.
was I assumed celebrating or sort of endorsing her indigenous heritage probably wasn't something that her parents were keen on doing.
Oh no, no. I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny. I saw a post the other day about people telling kids not to get too dark,
Mm.
not getting too much sun. That was my life. In
Really?
Florida, my mom would be like, "Oh no, it's summer, but you're wearing long sleeves."
Really?
Yeah, to make sure that I
Wow.
didn't get too dark.
Because you have a predication for it anyway, I get
Oh
genetically.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
dude. If I get in the sun for too long, yeah, I mean, I immediately start tanning. So,
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy.
yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. It's funny because you'd expect the other way. Like usually the military father would be the regimented sort of like, by the book, stick to the regular stuff kind of guy. But I love that he was sort of the outlier.
Oh yeah, my dad was. I mean, I had he died when I was 14, but I had for those 14 years, I had an amazing father. He was
Oh.
actually one of the 101st Airborne guys that walked in the Arkansas Nine.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So my
Wow.
dad was like back in the 60s and 70s was very open-minded. His best friend was black. Like,
Hmm.
something you didn't see, especially in the part of Florida I grew up in, which was
Wow.
very segregated.
Yeah.
And so like my dad was a very open-minded, like loving human being that was just like, even though he was in the army and a paratrooper, like he was very much about life and
Mhm.
and everybody having equal rights kind of thing. So
Wow.
my dad encouraged all the weird stuff.
That's
He's like,
awesome.
what you want to do is fine.
Did he die in combat or was it a
Oh no, no, no. He
no?
just died of a heart attack.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that'll do it too.
Yep.
Wow, crazy. So, what did you like growing up with those comics? It's funny, I often forget when you're talking about the comics that you read as a kid. I always forget about hot stuff. Like
Yep.
that was what I always find it funny because there's all these sort of cutesy, like it's sort of like in that weird like pocket where there were like comics for kids. And I don't think the comics code was really as big a thing then. So it was like they could have a devil as like a main character in a kid's comic. Like that stuff wouldn't fly today probably. But it's so funny that they had like essentially like a little devil running around as a big comic book character that kids are reading all the time.
Yeah, and I mean back then, like Richie Rich was the
Hmm.
main comic, right? So they
Right.
had Richie Rich, and they always had Hot Stuff and Wendy the Witch.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, the witch too, right?
It's
Yeah.
yeah, so there was like a witch and a devil, and then
Yeah. And a
millionaire.
ghost, Casper, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah, and then yeah, Casper. Yeah, so it's just like it is an interesting thing to think about. Like, would that even be would they let 5-year-olds read that now?
yeah, like even when like the comics code came around and they got around to like, you couldn't use certain words, like you couldn't use I think like Wolfman, like there were things like werewolf you couldn't there are things there werewolf by night was fine. I can't remember there are a few things in there that were like they couldn't use certain words in horror books. That related to certain things and they had to like really sanitize everything. So it's funny
Yeah,
that but yeah, just wild stuff. When did you move into like superhero stuff or did you ever were you
yeah.
into more of the bigger, wider world of comics, discover stuff beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously younger, stayed with those kind of things and
Hmm.
kind of bumped into, I remember even, I'm kind of, I say I'm cursed with a really good memory, because a lot
No,
of times
that's
that can be,
great.
that can be good or bad, like I remember all the bad stuff just as well.
I had
That's the
this
cool.
conversation with a friend yesterday. I said, for forgetting is a gift. I said, for most people, like, if you think about how bad that breakup was or how horrible that parent dying was, like, if you didn't forget about it, it would hurt, like, it would hurt a lot longer than it probably would. Like, forgetting
Oh yeah.
often is a gift. So you are
But yeah,
cursed.
I remember to this day, like I bumped into a Fantastic Four on the stand, at a 7-Eleven, the old school spinner racks.
Nice.
And it was one with the Silver Surfer in it. And I
Nice.
just, immediately was like, oh, what is this? And that was like, from that point forward, it was just superhero comics.
Nice.
And it was random for a long time. It was just like, whatever looked cool on the stands is what I'd pick up. So,
Mhm.
a lot of Fantastic Four, a lot of Avengers, a lot of Spider-Man. And then after my dad died, like I bumped into an issue of Uncanny X-Men. And it was a Wolverine heavy story.
Mhm.
And that kind of like at the place I was in at that point, that was a very crucial comic and character for me. Almost, I say to this day, like it saved my life. Like
Really?
because I was in a deep dark depression, and I just in my lost my dad who was my entire world at the
Mhm.
time and didn't know where I fit in anymore. Because now I'm in a 24/7, 365, like no abnormal activity is allowed.
Right. Yeah.
And then bumped into this like misfit group of X-Men who had the same kind of like morals as my dad, like, hey, we're going to fight for everybody to have equal rights.
Yeah.
And so like that comic just, and then I was an Uncanny X-Men boy for like at least a decade. Like
Yeah.
Claremont, was fantastic, and then you run through all the artists that were on there. Obviously, John Byrne was on at that point, and just amazing stories back then, just loved it.
That's awesome. Yeah, like it's funny because the X-Men seem like a stand-in for most marginalized people, but you kind of forget about even as a representative of people that themselves are connected to folks that are fighting for those causes, not necessarily one of that community, but one that are fighting for it.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, X-Men is certainly a lot of people. Kirby's one that comes up a lot whenever it's Fantastic Four, or one of those early superhero books, and I can never fault them. Like Kirby, I had a discussion with my last guest actually about how, like, to me, what everybody that's creating comics now, like you guys, we've all, like, I just do some indie stuff that I've done myself, but like anybody that's having any level of success or loves comics, like, you don't create it in a vacuum. You have like volumes and tomes and an insane amount of work that's come before you that you can be inspired by. But like a guy like Kirby, like, what did he have? Like he just seemed like a normal guy that just worked an office job, creating these insane worlds that didn't have like a wealth of stuff that came before him that he could draw this inspiration from. It all just sprung out of his seemingly normal 1950s kind of head. But it's insane. Like, it just, to me, the sheer output, the work, the creativity that came out of a guy that, didn't strike me as a dude that was probably reading a lot of sci-fi books or, going to weird movies on the weekends, created. It's insane. Like, it's just utterly insane.
Yeah, I mean, that group of creators back in that day, like, created a new medium, right? Like, with, like you said, with nothing to base it on.
Yeah.
And we still follow their rules to this day, which I think is incredible. I mean, I think Kirby did so much work that, like, he found all the problems. He's like, hey, wait a minute, don't do this because it won't work. I mean, I've done it 100 times already, but don't do this anymore. It doesn't work. It's like they laid down this foundation for the rest of us. It's like he said, I mean, and just kept going at it. And the fact that
and like working with others and doing what he did, but then even like when he was untethered in DC and doing the Fourth World, like when he was untethered, he came up with the Fourth World stuff, which is like insane. Like it's wild gods and darkness and these deeply existential sort of themes about purpose and meaning and all this. Like it's so funny because it's like you just look at the guy and he just looks like he should be working in an office or like a stock market somewhere, and he's just there, like, just creating worlds, insanely imaginative worlds.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those like true Renaissance guys too, right? Like, I mean, he was into everything. He beat up Nazis.
Yeah,
It's just one of those guys. He's just like a guy who had morals and stood by him and did this crazy comic book thing.
It's good. It's
living. It's amazing.
That's cool. Well, when did were you? I assume drawing was always a part of your childhood too when you're getting into comics.
Oh no. I drew a little bit, but I've always written. I'm a writer.
Oh yeah.
So like,
but I guess like it's kind of like a front line where you're like trying your hand at all that sort of stuff. Like I find a lot of the writers that I talked to when they began, it was it like they started with the art and then realized, well, I can't draw as well, and then they move on to the writing. So is that the case with you as well?
I mean, I doodled a little bit. I mean, I love doodling, but it was mostly like I would create spacecraft and tanks and that kind of stuff. So I was very much into like, Star Wars changed my life kind of thing. And so a lot of spaceships and those kind of things, but it was I never even tried to draw superheroes. I knew I never had that
Oh,
gene.
really? That desire.
Like,
Oh, it's funny.
no, yeah. And every now and then I tinker with it and go, this isn't for me. But I mean, even as a kid, and this is hindsight, I didn't know that as a kid, but like all I did all day long was write stories.
Yeah.
And it was so like creating them in my head or, old school typewriter. I loved typing on a typewriter and would just, constantly make up stuff,
That's awesome.
Just love living in that pretend world.
Were you a big reader as well, like novels and stuff? Like what were you?
Yep. Again, mostly
once comics got you to reading, you got to novels.
It was pretty cool for me. Like I never got into like any of the kids' book stuff. My dad was a heavy reader, and he loved science fiction. And he was one of those guys that like would go to a used bookstore back in the day and just bring home like 20 novels, read those for the week, and then take them back and exchange them for other ones.
Nice.
So that, it was one of those deals to where like, I started getting inspired by these covers, these science fiction covers. And I'd be like, what's that? And he'd like, oh, check it out. And I started reading them.
Yeah.
Then I was with him every weekend. I'd read one of the science fiction novels.
That's awesome.
Whatever, no, nothing in particular. Just whatever was in on the stand. I'd be like, oh, that one looks cool. Let me read that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because it's like in the fifth grade, I moved from a private Christian school,
Oh,
public
it must
school.
have been fun.
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't. And and I had to take a test, to see where I stood to be able to get in the public school system back
Right.
then. And there's a long story about how like they told me it didn't matter, so I didn't care, so I just filled in the bubbles as quickly as I could, back when they had scantrons and stuff.
Right.
And I came back as being, back then they classified me as retarded. That was the term.
Yeah.
Yep. And so my mom, of course, was crying, and oh my God, my son's,
Yeah, the ultimate like horrible thing for the woman that wants normality more than anything.
Yep, exactly. And my dad was like, wait a second. There's no way. There has to be more to this story. He goes, because he came, he's like talking to the principal going, my son's reading science fiction novels and asking me science questions.
Yeah.
Like something happened. And then of course, they brought me in and asked me why, about the test. And I was like, they were like, you finished in record time. I was like, well, that's because you told me it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Dude, I remembered. I didn't even read the questions. I was just going through and
wow, that's hilarious. It's crazy though, but like there's probably people out there that never bothered to have someone ask that question and just went through their life. You know what I mean? Like didn't care enough to go any further, got classified one way, fell into this weird thing. Like thank God your dad actually was engaged and paying attention and like, well, no, like he's reading. Yeah, the old sci-fi is like it's something I've kind of cracked into a little more lately. Because I read a lot of fantasy novels when I was a kid. That's probably because one of the first big books was The Hobbit for me.
Oh, yeah.
And that led to Dragonlance and Lord of the Rings books. And I try to read the Silmarillion every 10 years. I try to read it and I can't. It's not that I don't understand it. It's just there's so much they throw at you. It's just like, oh, it's like homework to read a book. But I've discovered like a lot of these old sci-fi writers that I kind of like breezed by me as a kid. They're like classic people like Ursula K. Le Guin and stuff that I never read that I'm really reading now. And it's just the sheer brilliance of it. Like The Lathe of Heaven by her is one of my favorite books I've read recently. And I think The Left Hand of Darkness is the next one on my pile, which everyone says is excellent too. So looking forward to that too. But
there was, I think back then there was better and more sci-fi than there is now.
Oh, and it was like 50 cents for a book, like you could buy like 100 of them for like a handful of like a change. It's insane. And there's like, and you look at like, because a lot of the big stories that we all love today are like the celebrated science fiction authors or these big tomes, leather-bound tomes they have of all their work. Those all were like backup stories in magazines and shit originally, right? Or like it'd be like in a, like those Alfred Hitchcock Presents books or whatever that were just like magazines of short stories. Like it would be serialized in one of those or it was in Playboy or something, like it was just always some wild. Like Kurt Vonnegut stuff was just sort of in the back of other stuff, and and then eventually got collected into something bigger. And it's it's wild, the sheer volume. Like you just the thing you could crack open like some shitty magazine and then read like a Kurt Vonnegut story that will later on become one of the biggest, one of the most heralded Like I'm a huge Vonnegut fan, so literature or even like Douglas Adams, his stuff was like a weird, like it's just funny that I guess you had to know where to find it back in the day, but now everything is so accessible all the time. It's wild. Well, yeah. Were you writing like sci-fi stuff when you were writing?
Oh yeah. I mean, I loved sci-fi especially my younger years and teenage years. I mean, I'm still a big sci-fi guy, but like back then, like pretty much all I wrote was science fiction.
Yeah.
So it was either had something to do, along the lines of Star Wars or Battlestar Galactica. One of those like the places I would drift. Although my biggest fandom was Star Trek.
Really?
Yeah, but Star Trek wasn't, when I was writing stories for myself, it wasn't actiony enough. So, I needed Vipers and X-Wings, like
yeah, geopolitical debates are normally the most exciting things to write about.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you get deeper into like existential questions, arguing about what's consciousness or what's life, sure.
Mhm.
But for a kid, it's not the most enticing thing.
No.
Well, that's funny. Well, it seems like, and not just to make judgments based on the books that you're currently working on or have worked on recently, but it seems like horror seems to play well into what you work in as well. Was that something that you gravitate towards as a kid as well, or
I was terrified of horror as a kid.
really? Oh
Oh yeah,
wow.
like I was, and I didn't really dive into it until probably my late teens, and then I
Hmm.
went, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
I just thought when I saw the horror stuff, I was like, oh my God, that's going to scare me, and it's going to be too much, and uh, and then just kind of like started watching it, and then just kind of I was always, to me, I always find it interesting. Like there's a taste of horror in almost everything, right?
Mhm.
Like
Oh yeah.
that's what drives a story.
Hmm.
Is like, I mean, if the Death Star isn't going to blow up an entire planet and kill everybody, which is horrific,
Yeah.
like, that story doesn't have its legs.
Well, I
And
always find the genre that like where it fits in the genre, like suspense, just depending on how big the budget is and what studio made it, is basically it goes from horror to suspense. Like Silence of the Lambs to me is a horror movie.
oh yeah,
They don't really classify it as that, but I mean, there's guys eating faces, there's a guy making a skin out of women. Like, what do you like? What else? The scene at the end in the dark, that's all terrifying. All the,
yeah,
and Hunter, the prequel or the prequel, but the first movie, the Michael Mann movie, um, like they're all horrifying stories. Like, but it gets wrapped up. Like, if there's anything sci-fi, it's just a sci-fi story. Like, Alien would be a sci-fi movie, not a horror movie.
right,
Although I would argue it's easily both.
yeah,
But you're right. Like, a lot of the movies we love that are like thrillers in quotes have aspects of like Dirty Harry. There's like a serial killer running around murdering people, like
yep,
and there's aspects of that that's rough and definitely falls into the realm of horror. And you kind of realize that it's literally just a label.
yeah.
Yeah,
Totally agree with you. Yeah, and I mean, the Alien was actually the first, what I would consider the first horror movie I ever watched.
yeah,
And I was, immediately in love. It was like, oh my God, this is like one of the greatest things ever. And that kind of like got me down the path. I mean, well, I'll say I'd watch some of the, what I don't know what you consider Poltergeist. I think they say it's a horror
yeah.
movie.
Sure.
It's kind of, it's
Yeah,
not like as scary as they try to play it out to be.
yeah. It's like
Uh,
the Amblin version of a horror movie. It's like
right.
the Stranger Things style of horror thing, where it's like kind of
Yeah.
sanitized for kids a little bit, but still cool.
Yeah. I watched
Yeah.
some of those, and I mean, my mom considered Godzilla movies horror movies. So I
Yeah,
could only watch those on the weekend at my dad's, and
that's funny.
absolutely love that. I'm still a huge Godzilla fan.
Oh,
That's
nice.
yeah.
That's a good time to be a fan.
Oh
They're
yeah.
doing all these beautiful re-releases of the old ones, and then the minus one was insanely good.
Yep.
So, wow. So when did you like when you were as you were writing? Like when did you go to school for writing? Like well, when you
Oh
finished?
no, no.
No.
I'm a little bit older,
Hmm.
so like in when I was getting out of high school, there wasn't any kind of like there was no comic book writing program at
Hmm.
all anywhere. So there was very few choices. Like you go to USC and do screenwriting. New York, there was a couple of like screenwriting or playwriting, and I wasn't interested in any of those. I wanted to
Hmm.
write comics. So those weren't options for me. I was
Hmm.
like, I'm not. So I've been to school multiple times. I have a degree in accounting and a degree in information technology.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and don't use any of them. So it's
That's most
like,
people.
yeah, and but yeah, I mean, in love school, but never thought of like trying to do literature or any of those kind of
Hmm.
things because I felt like that stuff was kind of always a little bit out of my league.
Yeah. Wow. Well, when did you start? Like, so you went into a career in accounting or IT when you got out of school? Is that what?
Well, I did for a couple of years in information technology.
Yeah.
Most of I've had so many jobs, dude. Like, it's
That's
a little,
good. That's experience, right? That's right what you know.
yep.
If you know a lot of stuff, you're laughing.
Probably the longest tenure of anything I've done is bookstores. I managed bookstores, Walden Books and Barnes and Noble for about 15 years.
Really? Wow.
Yep. Yep. And
Well,
I managed some comic shops as well along the way.
oh,
Uh,
okay.
kind of stayed close to that same
Yeah.
in the area. I needed to be in the industry somehow.
Yeah. The Barnes and Noble thing's interesting is like there's a real shift to me, like even as a kid, like I'm 39, I'll be 40 this year, and it's like I'm in Nova Scotia, Canada. So like, the world comics you got at a store that sold magazines and had a comic rack. Like there was a comic store in Halifax, which is the capital of Nova Scotia. That was about 3 hours away from where I grew up, so I never really got to go there very often. The idea now, you walk into like some of the graphic novel sections in like the major bookstores are huge and like and impressive. They have like a good like the chapters, which is their Indigo, which is kind of the one here. Um, they have huge racks and piles of crazy obscure, even like drawn in quarterly graphic novels, like of strange and obscure stuff. So like watching that in the bookstore system must have been interesting going through the years.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember the first Barnes and Noble we only had like one little section that had graphic novels.
Mhm.
And there was maybe 30 or 40 of them.
Like Mouse and it's usually it's always the same, like books that somehow have elevated a little higher than just
Yeah.
being comic books. Maybe Watchmen. Then
Yeah.
yeah.
It was just basically the classic stuff that they
Mhm.
thought they could move, which I mean, that's their job.
Yeah,
But
100%. Wow. So when did you actually get something, like when did you get published? When did you?
the first time I got published, I was 27.
Mhm.
I decided at 17 that I was going to be a comic book writer.
Mhm.
And then, 10 years later and 200 rejection letters later, finally got picked up, believe it or not, at Malibu Comics.
Really?
Yep.
Where
Um,
what were you sending in? Like
I
what
was
were your
a
submissions?
friend and I threw a pitch at them to do a new
Okay.
book, and they loved it. And it
Really?
was, yeah, they were like, hey, this is going to be a flagship book. We're going to do an ongoing. We
Out
pitched
of
them the,
nowhere? That's insane. Like you just
yeah,
sent it as pitch? That's crazy.
yeah.
Wow.
And so,
Amazing.
and basically, since the artist was still on a book and they wanted him to finish that book up before he moved on to the new one, they gave me a couple of issues of Ultra Force that I was going
Mm.
to do. I wrote one issue, got that finished. Marvel bought Malibu and shut them down. So,
Oh, oh,
yeah,
no. I was kind
yeah.
of waiting for that. Like I was hoping it maybe was a little bit before that. You had some time to fly before the
Nope.
before
I
that.
got one issue out, and then
Wow.
and then Marvel had no interest in keeping the editor who I'd built a relationship with. They didn't keep any of the people from Malibu. They had no interest in doing anything that was in production that hadn't been put out yet.
Wow.
So, and technically Marvel still owns it.
Yeah, they
So
don't do anything with it either.
no,
No, like none of the Prime or any of those characters. You never see anything with them.
they did a little bit when they first bought them, but the
Oh,
second they finally closed down the offices, they,
I feel
they
like I
took them away.
had somebody on here maybe one time, and this is like my memory isn't as good as yours for sure. But where we discussed why Marvel doesn't do anything with it. I think it's because there are still people, creators within it that would get money.
Right.
Like because they own the character, still have some tie to the character because Marvel has their own sort of way they deal with that stuff. But if these people were kind of grandfathered in because they were there before Marvel took over, and that's probably part of the reason why they don't really reprint it or do much of anything with it. I know like in 2005 they kind of half did something or they were talking about it, but it
Mhm.
never really panned out. Wow, that's crazy. So where'd you go? So that didn't deject you too much, I guess. Where'd you go
Oh
from
yeah,
there?
yeah, dude. I was absolutely destroyed. So, well, I mean, because at that point, like, there for several months, I was flying high. I was like,
Yeah.
I finally made it. You're validated because here's this company that's like going to put all their resources behind you because they believe in you that much.
Yeah.
And then that completely is taken away from you, and I was back to zero, like literally back down to starting over. Like I'm going to start sending pitches to editors and trying to build relationships again.
Was the pitch for an for a like what was it, for a new book or was it for some with the characters that
Oh, it
existed
was a
in?
brand new book.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it was a brand new series. Yeah.
Oh well.
And so then, yeah, then it was just, and after 10 years and 200 rejection letters, it was kind of one of those things where I was like, being 27 and thinking I'm old at 27.
Yeah. Yeah.
I started going, hey, I need to find a new path because this isn't working out.
Yeah.
So completely tried to stop writing for several years and went back to college, to get a new degree. And at the end of college, the muses started speaking to me again. So,
Mhm.
I started tinkering with it, playing with it. And then about a year later, I was like, you know what? I'm going to figure out how to do this. This is what I love. Like, I'm going to do this. This is all I care about. And then basically Kevin Gardner, who's the president of 12 Gauge Comics, he and I were sitting on a couch one day doing the same thing we all do, right? Like if I was in charge of Marvel, this is what I would do. The quarterback, the armchair quarterback,
Mhm.
like we think we know
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, of course.
And I can't remember which one of us said it, but one of us turned to the other one and went, "It's time to shut up or put up or shut up."
Mm,
We talk a big game. Let's see if we can make a comic. And so
yeah.
that's where we started 12 Gauge Comics. And the first comic we did was The Ride, which was, Brian. We had a murderer's row of artists who I just happened to have made friends with. Kevin and I had made friends with over the years of going to
Mhm.
cons and stuff. And they all agreed to do part of the book. And Brian Stelfreeze and I spent like 4 days creating a printed version of Pitch
Mhm.
because that's what you still had to do back then and send it to Image, thinking there's no way they're going to pick it up. And Image picked it up.
Wow.
So, and that just, that was kind of like the resurgence for me of like, okay, now I'm back on track and I can start doing books again.
Wow. Yeah, Image seems like a really, well, just from what I've talked to with like folks like yourself, they seem very, as far as the big companies go, they seem like the one that is most approachable or accessible
Oh
when it
yeah, by
comes to
far.
like unique ideas or doing your. I guess it's because like create your own book is sort of their bread and butter. They're not really, like when Marvel's and DC, they have to like safeguard all their stuff, make sure it's their stuff.
Yeah.
Because when they make $1 billion movie out of it, they need to make sure they get all that money, right?
Yeah.
But with Image, it just seems like they really seem to care about creators, and this just as an outsider looking in, and at least make sure that give them the space to do cool and unique stuff.
Yeah.
And it's
There's
worked
still,
out for them, like Walking Dead,
oh yeah.
so that sort of stuff. Like it's quite a few Invincible, even like quite a few of their lots of other non-Robert Kirkman projects, but yeah, it seems like they really do give you that space, which is nice.
Yeah. I mean, first off, love them. I've always loved working with them.
Yeah.
And they're still the only company that I know of that you still retain all your IP rights.
Right.
Like you get to keep everything. We don't want any of that. Still the only company after all these years and their proven track record of putting out books. They're still the
Mhm.
only company that does that. Um, but on the flip side, like they're also not going to necessarily give you any money. So
No.
like you got to figure out how to do it on your own. So it's almost like you're self-publishing, but at the same time you're working with Image to kind of get this book distributed to stores and stuff.
Mhm.
And so it's a wonderful. I mean, for me, it's been a fantastic avenue for me. I love
Nice.
working, like I said, love working with them, and they've been able, they keep approving books here and there. So like, I'm going to keep doing them.
That's awesome. Well, when did you? So, what was the ride about? I missed that one
The
in
ride
my
was
research.
we initially intended it to be an anthology, so it was
Uh,
going to be a book that followed a '68 Camaro and all the
okay,
lives it came in contact with. So, very like
that's cool.
more Fargo, True Detective.
Mm.
Like it was supposed to be more of a Southern crime thriller.
Mm.
And so it's all set in the South. That's where the '68 Camaro came in and stayed in the South. And so yeah, I mean it was just in the first story I got to write, which was a two-issue story divided into shorts so that the artist we were getting could do just 11 pages versus having
Mm.
to commit to doing 22 pages.
Right.
So in black and white, originally. And yeah, we just did, cars and guns, like
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah, those crime books seem to do well for them too, because they a guy I've had on the show before who lives actually out here, Ed Burson,
Oh yeah.
did some Image indie stuff, mostly a lot of crime stuff. So yeah, he's a cool guy. I've had him. He was my first guest on the show, and he actually lives in Nova Scotia now. So
That's cool.
I run into him every once in a while at different events, and I actually do a book fair once a year that we have. Or well, actually, it's probably gonna be more than once a year. It's kind of like, do you guys have Scholastic book fairs out there? Like when
Oh
you're,
yeah.
yeah. So it's like that for adults at a bar.
Oh,
So
nice.
like, yeah, so you can like get a drink and eat food and shop for books. Because I'm a big
Yep.
reader, and it's like a cool way to kind of do that. So yeah, and he's going to be there with some of his newer books, selling
Yeah.
them too. So, but yeah, he's done some really cool crime stuff through Image, and I mean, just so much cool stuff out there. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. Well, Ed, I'm always jealous. There's a couple of guys like that. So like there's Ed and Greg Rucka
Mhm.
off the top of my head that I can think of. Two guys that can like they can do crime books and make money at it.
Mhm.
The rest of us like we put crime books out and nobody cares.
Well, it's always wild to me because there's so many of them, and then like every once in a while there'll be like a movie, and you'll be like, and then you'll find out it was based on some weird little crime comic you never heard of, and you're like, what?
Yep.
Like I always, one of my favorite facts to bring up is that I mean, a lot of people knew History of Violence was based on a graphic novel, which is a really cool movie. I'm a huge fan of it, and I actually do a bit of acting, and I was in a movie with Maria Bello one time from that
Wow.
movie, which is really cool. And I had to stop from like not wanting to ask her questions about it all the time because I really dig that movie. But or even Road to Perdition. It's like a lot of people don't realize that's one of my favorite things to bring up is like that was a movie that was a comic book originally. There's lots of these weird little crime comics that are out there that kind of get stuff and people don't realize that they're connected to that.
Yep.
Yeah. But I guess a narrative's a narrative. If you like the story and it resonates, you can kind of do anything with it.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
hope,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, like the current books you're working on, like the Fashion School Serial Killer and like Plastic, like so do you find yourself like you mentioned that you kind of got into horror a little later on? Are you mired in that world now? Like, do you follow all the horror things that are going on in the horror community,
Yeah.
the
I mean,
movies? Yeah.
for me, I love horror, but I like it to be more psychological. The
Yeah.
gore movies don't necessarily. I know that's weird saying that if you read my books, but those don't resonate with me as much because I think it's just a little too visceral for me.
Yeah. You can
But the
walk a line.
psychological stuff I love,
Yeah.
and um, for our stuff, we wanted the gore to be in there, but we wanted it to be so ridiculous that it almost makes you laugh.
Yeah.
So I think that takes the edge off the visceral side of that stuff.
Mm. The
But
comics are a weird
yeah,
medium with it too, because like there's always something inherent to me, even horror comics, there's always something inherently, I wouldn't say silly, but like when you watch a horror movie, like the thing comes out at you, you're experiencing in real time. In a book, it's all a lot more slower paced. And also the fact that you're reading it as an art, as a drawing, as well, I feel is kind of like, so if you can actually kind of unsettle me in a horror comic, it's always a feat to me.
yeah,
And good writing is good writing. You'll dig the book regardless. But you're right, like to get both, and it lives lots of like heady existentialist kind of horror stuff that has lots of gore in it. I
oh
mentioned
yeah.
Cronenberg earlier with History of Violence, like his stuff's kind of out
Hmm.
there and wild. That's really cool. Well, walk me through the book. So what came next then? What was after? Like, what was your first book beyond the ride?
Oh, after the ride, man,
Yeah,
then things get a little complicated. So it's we kept doing some of the ride.
yeah,
Meantime, because Kevin's funding this himself, so
hmm,
like he has to take breaks and that kind of stuff. The editor that initially hired me at Malibu Comics ends up working for DC Comics,
hmm,
and he ends up in charge of the DC custom line, which is like, when you see NFL doing comic books and stuff, they do all
right,
that they do a lot of that stuff through DC.
yeah,
So he calls me up and I start doing regular work for DC Comics, but not DC proper.
hmm.
It's all like I was working on Person of Interest and the Flash TV
Oh,
show.
those, yeah, okay,
Yeah, but it was all the comic side of it,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so like all that kind of stuff. I did a comic for the General Mills that was in the cereal boxes, those kind of things. So I'm doing
That's
that for a
interesting.
while. Yeah. At the same time, like he also gets me to he talks me into, because I didn't want to. He talks me into pitching for World of Warcraft. They're doing graphic novels.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, so
Like,
I'm glad we're there.
yeah. And he's like, there's 20 writers and they're all sending in pitches. And I go, dude, I've never played World of Warcraft. I don't know anything about it. Like, there's no way. Let's not waste anybody's time.
Hmm.
And he's like, no, send in something. So, I played the game for like a week, and kind of got the basic, vibe of it. And by the way, I fell in love with it. And then
And maybe this is just like a really organic pitch, like marketing strategy to get
oh
more
yeah,
people playing
yeah.
the game. It's like, yeah, we need all the writers to play it for a couple of weeks. And yeah,
Yeah. Send in a pitch. And
yeah.
lo and behold, they picked me.
Wow.
So like Hank Knauts was the editor, at Malibu and then at DC, who kind of like fostered all this. And I couldn't believe they picked me. And then of course I was freaked out. I was like, I don't know anything about this universe. Like, what am I going to do? But they liked what I threw down.
Yeah,
And
because you're
apparently,
probably not too close to it, right? That's
yeah,
probably why, because you could like structure a good story within the world because you're focused on a good story and not necessarily something that's the world specific, right?
yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's I think that's almost exactly what they told me, dude.
yeah,
Like they were like, we want somebody who isn't so steeped in all the lore that
mhm,
they can create new characters and not reference stuff from the game
yeah,
constantly.
yeah. That makes
You know,
sense.
Yeah, we just want a story about characters.
Mm.
And so, got that. Then, along that way, I'm still working on creator owned stuff. So I'm like, I did The Hard Place with a friend, Nick Rommel, who's in North Carolina, and he and I kind of did that and did that through pitch it through 12 gauge as well. That was a crime, another 5 issue crime deal. Um, and then, things are going pretty well. And I'm talking to Daniel Hillyard, who he and I, have started kind of tinkering around working together. And I'm like, hey, let's do our own book. And he's like, pitch me some ideas. And I pitched him some ideas. And surprisingly, he picked plastic because I didn't think he would. And I was like, are you sure? Because like this one's a weird one. And he's like, yeah. And so he and I start working on it and pitched it to Image. And Eric and Robert Kirkman loved it. And the next thing we know, we're doing this book that people were telling us not to do because it was going to ruin our careers. And then we've been doing that kind of stuff ever since.
Well, for the uninitiated, walk us through plastic.
Oh, plastic it follows Edwin. He's a retired serial killer, and I use the term retired loosely.
Hmm.
He's in love with a blow-up doll, and somebody steals it from him. So he has to come out of retirement to save the love of his life. So you get this like guy who's cutting people's heads off and putting them in baggies and labeling them, killing all these people, trying to work his way back to the woman he loves, who's a blow-up doll.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I love that they loved it. That's awesome. That's what I mean. Like that just seems, you send that to anybody. What are they going to tell you? But if somebody can see the value of that or the benefit of it or the imagination behind it or where you can go with it. I mean, that's a level of creativity in itself, is to just recognize somebody else's vision for what it could be instead of just, that's awesome. So yeah, for the now you're the guy making weird horror comics. Like that's it.
Yep. Because I won't lie, there was like it was like a 50-50 split of friends and colleagues that were like, I'd tell them what I'm working on, they're like, guy, like if you go down that road, it's going to ruin your career. Nobody's going to touch you. You are Daniel, and we've been doing those books ever since. So there's yes and no to that. Like I've talked to editors at Marvel and DC since, and they've seen stuff like plastic and vinyl and plush. And they've just said point blank to me, we don't know what we would put you on because, it's so strange and out there.
But like, that's assuming that all you can do is that, like it's so wild to me when it's like, for instance, like an actor, and they're like, oh, well, he was played like a serial killer in a movie. Now he has to always play some kind of weird serial killer or psychosexual monster or something. Like people have range, like you let it give them something else. I'm sure like you could do a horror comic for Marvel very well, or anything. I'd probably, like
and that's, I think
it's weird. You got to put him in a bucket or like a little box and say, this is you.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think people enjoy putting people in a box, and they're like, hey, if you're Chris Evans, you always have to be an action star.
Yeah.
And proven time and again that he can do more than that. Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man, yet he's doing these great side movies for himself that are he's incredible in.
Winning an Oscar in Oppenheimer, like,
Exactly.
So yeah, I love I think one of my favorite examples is Elijah Wood, because he just sort of like did the Lord of the Rings and then just sort of like pieced out. Now he just like produces and stars in weird little horror movies that are always very, very smart, imaginative, and cool. And but it just seems like a guy with the profile he would have had coming out of the Lord of the Rings, wouldn't need to go do all that stuff, but he likes it, so he does it. That's cool. And then so I was a a fashion school serial killer. That's also the NAS in the fun. Like, is there like do you have an appreciation for fashion or art in that level?
I didn't until I started the book.
Okay. Well, what gravitated you towards that particular concept?
Yeah, it was just one of those deals where like, yes and no. Like I love cosplayers. I love watching, there's several different shows about fashion that, like all the Tim Gunn shows, ones, RuPaul and those kind of things that I enjoyed watching. Didn't necessarily have an affinity for it. I'm definitely not a fancy dresser.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I started down the path of like, hey, I'm gonna put the serial killer in a fashion school, it just seemed to have, for her it fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did a deep dive and I just fell in love with all of it. Like it's just such a interesting history to it.
Mm-hmm.
And like seeing that it's a different form of creativity.
Yeah.
We normally see like say movies or music, but all of these things are the same. Like when you get deep into them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just fun to kind of see how it's different in that you're kind of wearing it, right? Like where like if we're
Yeah.
talking, an artist brings you their art, they hand it to you. No, in fashion, you wear it and you try to sell it to
Well,
people.
there's a function. It's not,
Yeah.
there's function beyond just, the art of it. There's still a function level to it
Yeah.
too, right?
And
Um,
and there's so much, I mean, there's so much psychology behind it. Like people think, and they're not wrong. People think that fashion is going to make you more attractive, and it does.
Oh,
Like,
so many things. Status, like how
yeah,
it looks on your body, what having certain brands says about you, like,
yeah.
status, if you can afford a Rolex or whatever fancy ass clothes you're wearing. The Yeah, like I appreciate. I mean, I dress in a lot of Hawaiian shirts and stuff in the summers. That's generally what I do. But like, I appreciate this stuff. I just also have a level of like practicality where I'm like, if this shirt is like $300, I don't need that shirt. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so. But and also, what I think interesting about the fashion world and something I'm sure you tap into the book. I haven't had a chance to read this one yet. Was the like the pretension that comes with art, and there's certainly a lot of it
Yeah.
in that world, in the
Yeah.
fashion world. Like, have you ever seen the movie Art School Confidential?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So that movie, like, I always bring that one up. Whenever someone talks to me about going to art school, that's immediately what I think of is that movie. And I've talked to people that have gone to art school and they say it's not far off. Like it's pretty close. So like the fashion world is like that on a different, like almost like a slightly higher level, because even people in that world are kind of like, even if you're like the best regarded artist, you're still probably not making tons of money. If you're a big fashion person, you're laughing. So
Oh
it's like
yeah.
a level higher, right?
Well, and I mean, think about, like when you talk about comics or movies or like all the different genres and stuff we have, right?
Mm.
And I would say there's different genres in fashion, but there's either high fashion or Target.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
None of them are aiming to be Target,
yeah.
right? Like they don't go to fashion school to become like the most successful Target,
Yeah.
designer.
I can't wait to work for George at Walmart. That's the brand I want to be in charge of.
But there's people making billions of dollars doing that,
Yeah.
but you don't hear about them, right?
No, because they
Nobody
don't
cares
care.
who the
Yeah.
designers are behind, champion sweatshirts,
Yeah.
like
That's what you're right. Like it's funny because, and I also am a little fascinated with that is like people that are like, the billionaires or millionaires or people that are like making this crazy stuff they're not in the front lines. They're happy
yeah,
to. And like to me, that's like almost like the sweet spot because you're a millionaire and you can go, walk to the supermarket and you're fine and go to like
yeah.
go to your little private island somewhere and no one knows who you are and you're laughing.
And
Uh
I think with the high fashion stuff, like you have to be pretentious a little bit
oh yeah,
because
that's
like
part of it.
they can't they can go to Walmart, but you better be wearing something that is amazing. Like you can't throw on your pajamas and your flip flops, and run out to Walmart real quick. No, you got to get the good stuff on.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess in a way you almost have to become a character, like it's almost like you're playing. You're like, it's almost like I do many jobs as well. One of them is I'm a professional wrestler. So it's almost like being a professional wrestler mentality. Like you have to play a character out in the world when instead of just being yourself when you want to go to the supermarket or something, if someone sees you, you have to kind of amp it up. That's really funny. Well,
Oh,
I
dude,
was
being
sorry.
a professional wrestler was always like one of my side dreams.
Oh, really? Well,
But
it's
but
fun.
I'm
It's
like
fun. I
I'm,
won't
I'm like
glorify it for you, but it
yeah.
is fun. It is fun. I do
Oh,
enjoy
well,
it.
I'm like 5'8", 5'9", so like
Yeah.
you know.
You still can do it. There's a lot. I know guys shorter than that are doing it. Uh,
I might have to go to Mexico or something like that.
That's fine. I know a lot of guys do
Yeah.
that too. Nothing wrong with that. Those guys are great. Um, yeah, wrestling is an interesting world. It's certainly kind of getting dragged into the modern day now with like sort
Oh
of
yeah.
more relevant storylines and more culturally sensitive characters and stuff like that than it used to be.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, one book I did want to discuss with you, obviously as a music fan, is Vinyl. And
Oh
this is
yeah.
one I have read. Um, which I thought was really cool. And once again, focused on serial killers, which I've noticed is a trend with you.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but having like a serial killer that's sort of with dementia, I suppose it is. I guess I don't
Yeah.
know if they
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
yeah, and having his sort of memories being brought back through music is like a really interesting concept to me. And was there something that predicated that, or is it just you came up with it one day, or Was there like what was the
When we were
impetus?
kind of developing the character, like I had read in the, I think that I was always very important for a reader, I mean, a writer
Mhm.
to read as much stuff as he can get his hands on. And I'd read a couple articles about how they've been using music and that they would remember those times wherever they had heard that music, back in the day. And so music was a very instrumental tool in helping people with dementia. And so as I'm developing the serial killer, like that just kind of hit me like I wanted him to be wearing headphones when he was killing people and listening to music. And it was like, well, what if then it kind of dawned on me like, oh, what if he's older and he has dementia and the only way he can remember who he is as a serial killer is if he's listening to music. And so it just kind of led itself down that path of like, hey, let's use this. And still to this day, one of my favorite characters because of that. And he listens to a lot of the old stuff that I love, Ella Fitzgerald and that kind of class of music and listening to those as I'm writing the story was kind of fun because you
Oh
don't think
yeah.
those being soundtracks to a horror movie, but they totally work.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. There's a reason why every once in a while there'll be like some horror movie that'll come out that'll use some old song. Usually it's always got usually the score or the soundtrack always has some like poppy song at the end, like for the credits, but usually music is a big part of it. I
yeah,
love a lot of stuff when I'm like drawing or writing or something or reading. I like to listen to scores because I don't want to focus on the lyrics. It's just music that's
yep.
incidental. But yeah, no, it's there's a real level to like what that can like with music and art and how that can sort of carry you through sometimes. But it's a really neat concept. Have you always had a fascination with serial killers?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
As a kid, my very first character I ever created was Butcher Knife Man.
Great
That
name.
was
Where's
the
that
name.
book? I want to read that book. We got
And he didn't
Chainsaw Man. You
get
can throw Butcher Knife Man in there.
yeah, he was in my head, he was a superhero, of course, because
Uh-huh.
that's what I do. And he was a superhero that ran around killing people with butcher knives. He killed the bad guys with butcher knives. And so that
You know
was
what? I like this idea. It's just,
yeah,
it's so funny because like, what would the cops do? Like, what was
yeah.
they'd be like, well, he stopped them, but like the idea that it's like a regular superhero that's like a sadistic murderer, but he only kills bad guys, but they find the bodies in pieces and just go. Well, he stopped the killer clown, but he's, eviscerated him and painted a
Yeah.
mural on the wall with his insides. I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same. To me, it's he obviously that the Punisher has become that in the Marvel
Yeah.
universe now. To me, it's like, what do you do with a character that kills everybody? It's like,
Yeah.
well, how do you handle that? But yeah, that was my always like that kind of stuff. As far as like that edgy
Mm.
or horror spin on heroes, and just kind of serial killers kind of fascinated me in that way. Like when I was younger, probably teenage years, and reading about people like Ted Bundy
Mm.
and how personable and how everybody seemed to love them
Mm.
until they found out who they were. And that's always been fascinating to me. It's like, man, is it just a perspective thing? Like,
Well, it shows how far charisma can take you.
yeah,
There are people that coast through life because they're charismatic,
oh yeah,
regardless of whether they're good at their job or not, people like them and they let people
yep,
like being around people they like.
yeah,
So, yeah, Bundy's an interesting one. I remember I read Durf Backderf's My Friend Dahmer
hmm
book, and I never watched the movie. I know they made an adaptation of it, but the book just sort of like it unnerved me in a way because like anything in the world, I love horror stuff. I love all this stuff. And the idea that like the fantastical stuff, the zombies, the werewolves, that's not going to happen. You can kind of like not worry about it. But when you watch a really good movie about a serial killer, you're like, oh, or someone that's just like doesn't care about other people. It doesn't matter what they, doesn't have empathy. These exist. Like they're out there. So when I read that one, it was sort of like he went to high school with Dahmer. They were like they weren't best friends, but they were in the same circle of friends. And he just sort of describing what it would day to day was like, and it's kind of juxtapositioning what his family life was like, and he even says in the beginning, like, "Look, I'm not excusing him for anything he did. To me, once he murdered somebody, I lost all sympathy for him. But this is just sort of a study on how someone can slip through the cracks, and perhaps if someone had said something or noticed something early, this guy may have escaped the fate that and the fate of his victims. But you just like just this weirdo guy in high school that seemed like an odd character that everybody kind of liked but was weird, and you just realize how many people in your life you run into like that, and you're like, oh. Yeah, that guy couldn't. It's and he even said when someone called him, I think to tell him someone from their high school just found him to be a mass murderer. He said, "Oh, this guy," and it wasn't even Dahmer; it was a different guy. Like he thought it was like that guy seemed like the guy that would have been the mass murderer.
Yeah.
So yeah, like there's something unnerving. It's like because isn't Anne Rule wrote that book, The Stranger Beside Me, about working with
Mhm.
Ted Bundy and what that was like, or the killer, the monster beside. I thought it was The Stranger Beside Me or something. How she like
Yeah.
worked with him and he seemed like and they were covering like when she was writing about stuff going on that he was the one doing it. So it's wild, man.
Yeah.
But,
And that's what's always kind of fun about writing these characters is that they might seem like normal people or just a little off.
hmm,
And I think, when you already brought up Silence of the Lambs, like which is I think most people end up rooting for the serial killer in that movie because
that
because
one
like
anyway. I don't think they
yeah,
were they're going for Dollarhide. I think they were mostly for oh wait, sorry, Dollarhide was the Red Dragon. Um Gum, the Buffalo Bill. But
oh
yeah,
yeah,
certainly, yeah, so you're right. He's charismatic enough that he's cool enough. But people tend to gravitate towards cool characters, which is why like so many characters to me in fiction that you shouldn't idolize
yeah,
get idolized. Like the Punisher is a good example of one, or like
yep,
Rorschach from The Watchmen. People are like, he's so cool, and it's like, yeah, he's like visually cool and he hurts people, but if you actually read the story and understand the person, he's a fucking monster.
yeah.
Like you wouldn't like he's not someone you would want in your corner, like so. Yeah, you're right though. There's something about the darkness that gravitates toward people towards it, but
And
also like,
I think what we've discovered too, which is interesting when you start talking about the Punisher and
yeah,
Rorschach and even Deadpool, right?
yeah,
Uh, as bad and as horrible as a serial killer and these people and these mass murderers, when you start
mm,
talking about Deadpool and Punisher, are, you recognize that that's not the worst a human can be to another.
mm, yeah, yeah,
There's worse things.
yeah,
And it's like, and you start thinking, and I think that's what makes it easier for me when I'm writing these characters. Like, yes, these are horrible, like what they do is horrible, but there are worse people.
mm,
So you start rooting for somebody like the Punisher because, well, at least he's killing people that are worse than him.
yeah,
And so you start identifying with, yes, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like does somebody need to do that? Does
yeah.
somebody need to call the horrible people in the world?
Well, it's why Dexter has like 9 seasons and then a bunch of
Oh yeah.
other spin-off shows. It's like the idea that like, well, yeah, sure, he's a monster, but he's killing other monsters that are way worse than him.
Yeah.
So, that's I guess that you're right. So it kind of morally puts you in a place that you're okay to root for them.
Yeah.
But then you get into like people that like, like a Friday the 13th or something where it's just
Oh yeah.
it's just the cooler the kills, the more exciting the movie or the more, you go behind it. Not so much.
Oh yeah, and those always have their place, right? Like Freddy Krueger
Yeah.
and Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. Those characters always have their place, and they're fun to watch. But yeah, they're definitely not the you don't root for them ever.
No, no. Well, I often talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That one's probably one of my favorite horror movies because it
Oh
just
yeah,
makes you feel like, as a movie, it just makes you feel gross. Like from start to
yep.
finish, you just feel like you need a bath or a shower. And there are people. I wouldn't say there are people that are the same as those people out there, but there are certainly people that are adjacent to those people out there.
Oh yeah.
Whether they're not actually chainsawing people and eating them, or if you get into the sequels, having a chili contest with them or whatever. But uh, a lot of people sleep on the second Chainsaw Massacre movie. It's well worth your time to watch that movie.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
I remember. I think it was Toby Hooper in an interview where he said like, because they did a screening, I think it was a couple of years ago for Halloween at a bar in Halifax where you could go and they had a big screen set up in the parking lot and they showed, I think it was Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then Pumpkinhead, or
Oh yeah.
maybe good double bill. Maybe it's just Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I know they did Pumpkinhead like Ernest Scared Stupid one year too. But anyway, so I remember watching that movie, and it's one of my favorite movies. I've seen it many, many times. But there's a few things you laugh at. Like there's some comedy
Yeah.
hidden in it. And Toby
Yep.
Hooper even said he said when I made the first one, I put humor in it, and I watched it. No one really laughed at the parts they're supposed to laugh at. So when I did the second one, I really hit them over the head with it. And he really
Yep.
did. He really, really did, which is great. Awesome. Well, what's next for you? What's coming out? Any appearances, cons, new books you want to talk
Um,
about or can talk about?
doing a couple cons. Most of them are fairly local.
Mhm.
doing like a Fan X, which is in Salt Lake City,
Mhm.
Wasatch Comic Con, which is another one that's like a little show, but it's fantastic. That's in Salt Lake City. Already did Emerald City. Um, I think that's all I've got planned for this year. Next year, I'm trying to do more, but this year I
Nice.
was kind of taking a break, kind of stepping back a little bit.
Nice.
Um, traveling and carrying 200 pounds of books with you is never an easy task. So I was
That's
like,
the funny part of the writer, at least with the artist, when you're doing art stuff, you can kind of, a lot of paper isn't quite so heavy as carrying around massive amounts of books.
yeah. And dude, I mean, they can do sketches and make a couple $100. I'm selling
Yeah.
$20 trades. I got to take as much as I can carry.
Yeah, it's
So,
true.
like, yeah.
Got an Escalade just crammed to the gills with them.
Yeah.
Well, what's the next book, or is it just still working on?
Obviously, I mean, Fashion School Serial Killer is the one that's coming out now. I think the second issue just came out yesterday. And so Daniel and I have already finished that one up, and we've already moved on to the next one. So, then it's just, keep my, obviously I can't talk about that stuff until Image tells us, gives us permission to start talking about stuff.
That's
But we
awesome.
just keep our heads down and keep putting out books.
Sweet. Another fun horror book?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, you're in your box. Yeah. It's a nice box though. I like it. It's you're doing some really cool, unique stuff, and
Thanks, man.
the black comedy horror stuff's always a fascinating read to me. So I really appreciate the chance to chat with you about it. That's
No,
awesome.
thanks, man. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
All right. What's I always ask people when I've started asking people when I talk to them that are into horror on the show. What's one obscure horror movie that people may not have seen that you suggest?
Oh man, an obscure one that people haven't seen. I find and this one kind of shocks me a little bit. There's two of them that I find, they're more in the dark comedy line. But I'm surprised how many people haven't seen The Babysitter on Netflix.
Oh, really? Yeah, the show. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's two
And
of those now, right?
Yeah, there's two
Yeah.
of them. Jenna Ortega's in the second one.
Right.
She's fantastic. Yeah. And then Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Oh, I love that movie.
People
Yeah.
haven't seen that one. Both of those movies are like those are my sweet spot. Like they're ridiculous and funny. There's still horror in them, but they make fun of it, in its own way. And both of those movies I adore. Like, and I think more people should see both of those.
Oh, Tucker and Dale versus Evil is awesome. I love
Oh
that
yeah,
movie. They do such a good job with like just the vibe of that. Like when they, because Alan Tudyk and Tyler Bean are both great actors, but just like, he's talking to his brother and he just like looks over at the teenagers over there and he's just glancing, but then like from their view, he looks like
Yeah.
he's like just like the creepiest staring, like it's such a great kind of concept behind the perception and all that stuff.
Dude,
Not even just a super fun movie.
I cried, laughed when he's running with the chainsaw and the bees.
Oh, the bees, yeah.
Yeah, that's like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah. Or when they drive by the teenagers in the car and he's just looking out the window at them and they look like the hillbilly redneck, like
Yeah.
serial killer monster, like deliverance guys. It's so good.
It's
Oh, those are
just
good.
two guys trying to put a cabin together and live their life and find love. It's
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, well, great suggestions. Thank you very much. Well, thanks for being in the show, Doug. This is awesome.
That's my pleasure anytime.
Oh, well, I really appreciate it. And have a great day.
You too.
All right. All right. There you have it, my conversation with Doug Wagner. A great talk, a great conversation. Great creator, and doing some really cool work out there and bringing horror comics to the mainstream, making some really neat stuff with it, taking some really cool ideas, and, making them his own and getting out there waving the flag for horror. We need more horror, as I often say. Thanks, Doug, for being in the show. Much appreciated. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode. That episode will be with Peter Sanderson, who is a comic archivist and historian who's worked on the who's who of the DC Universe, the Marvel Comics archives, the histories, those books. He's worked on a lot of those. He was once a librarian for the Marvel Comics empire. And, yeah, really cool guy. A deep connoisseur of continuity when it comes to comics, and we get into it. As one myself, I wouldn't say nowhere near the level of Peter, but as one that really appreciates continuity in a way that you can follow and appreciate throughout the years. Peter really is the epitome of that, and we have a great conversation about it. So tune next week to my conversation with Peter Sanderson. In the meantime, stay safe, have fun, read some comics, and read a book. Just read something. Read, goddammit, read! The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.